Well, hey there. You've stumbled upon the intersection of internet quandaries and psychological insight. Welcome to Veritas Views on AITA, where the quirks of the internet meet the expertise of Veritas Psychology Partners.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Michael McBride. I'm joined by our dynamic duo of psychologists.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gayle MacBride, and today I am joined with, joined by.
I'm Dr. Daniel Kessler, and I'm
Thank you.
business partner of Dr. Gayle MacBride, and looking forward to today's internet conundrum and answering the questions that people have about relationships. So, Michael,
doing the heavy lifting today. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, excellent. Michael, what do you have for us today?
Well, I do have, I was telling Gayle beforehand, like I have several that I'm actually really interested in. So I've had to like narrow it in and hone it. But I guess for any of the newbies out there, our quick introduction is, if you don't know what Am I the Asshole is, in short, somebody online has offered a scenario and asked, who is the asshole here? Because the internet is who you want to turn to for that kind of thing.
Always.
Dan and Gayle are going to help us determine in this specific situation who's the asshole. And, you know, where there are identifiable information in the post, we've tried to change those and be a little more discreet. And if you're new, there's always a bonus conversation at the end of the episode. And this week, we happen to have something from our mailbag. So hang around past the credits and hear that conversation. But for now,
fantastic.
Neither Gayle nor Dan have heard or read this. I haven't tipped their hands to anything about it. And let's go. So this topic today is, am I the asshole for being too eager to be brutally honest to adults in family therapy? And so this comes from
what our radio listeners don't know is that we both Gayle and I have intensely puzzled looks on our face. Usually there's a snap judgment
radio,
here.
By the way.
I know the reference to radio. That's awful. What our podcast listeners don't know, I'm old. Okay, so I said radio. I apologize.
Yes.
Holy cow.
Yes. What our listeners are not aware of is our puzzled faces versus our usual jump to a conclusion.
Right. So, Michael, please share more. This is going to be interesting. I'm puzzled. I'm having more coffee.
So the poster says, me, my dad, my dad's wife, my sister, and my stepsister are in family therapy. And my dad and his wife and I had a session between the three on Thursday. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure of the calendar here, but the therapist suggested that we have, the three of us have alone time because some delicate stuff needed to be discussed. And she felt it better that the girls not be there for this. So there's an age gap between the poster and his sisters. His sister and stepsister are about 8 years younger than him. So the point of the therapy was because my dad and his wife noticed that I wasn't close to my stepsister and that my sister and stepsister weren't close. And they wanted us to be more of a family after 6 years. The thing was, I was brutally honest about the adults. I do treat my sister and stepsister different, and I favor my sister. That was always true. I never saw them both as my sisters. And the truth, or confessions, or whatever you want to call them, took my dad and his wife by surprise. The therapist told them it was a lot to take in, but that there were some similar sentiments shared by the girls, because the therapist met with them independently. Most on them not being close. She told them that they missed a lot by assuming, and that my stepsister felt isolated because of it all. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the struggle we ran into is that the mom and stepmother were shocked at how brutally honest I was in therapy and told me that I shouldn't have been so revealing of the inner workings of our family, that it violated their trust. So the question here is, am I the asshole for being brutally honest?
Huge pause again.
I know.
As therapists, we want our clients to be honest. We want them to be vulnerable. We want them to be revealing. My pause, I don't know about yours, Dan, is the word brutally.
Yeah.
I don't like when people create excuses versus reasons. We can go into that.
Yeah.
for being brutally honest about anything. You know, I think it's just an excuse to behave and communicate poorly or aggressively and unkindly.
Yeah.
That's
No,
the
and I was trying to figure this out because but he says brutally honest. And
sure.
when there are favorites it sounds like what he's being brutally honest about is that he was favoring his sister over his stepsister and treating them differently. Um, I, maybe he said it more meanly than that, but that sounds like the sort of disclosure that one is really helpful in a room for people to acknowledge that they're treating people differently, and two, um, probably everyone knows already.
Sure.
Like when those kinds of favorites being played in families, no one's like, "Oh, I never noticed that before." Like,
Sure. They're a little like, whew, finally you're willing to admit it and we can talk about this more openly. And
yeah, yeah. It's sort of like and this is one of those questions, one of those statements that really gets hackles up. Um, Parents sometimes have favorites.
yeah.
Parents often
You and
have
I don't. Let's
favorites.
be really clear.
Oh, no, 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 no. If
Right?
any of my
No,
children are
no, no,
listening,
no.
absolutely not. And often everyone in the family knows who the favorites are. And when the family, and I should say that differently, maybe not favorites, but like children that I shouldn't say that parents necessarily have favorites. But parents often have children that they just get along with easier. They're more like, they have better
Mhm.
communication with. And this can be really hard
Yeah,
because often people know it and don't talk about it, or know it and do talk about it. And it's challenging.
it is. It is. And I think so. If we go back to this OP's family for a moment,
Hmm.
there is sort of an unsolvable dynamic,
Yeah,
which is the OP saying that this stepsister was not, in his view, a sister. In a
right.
blended family, I think that's really difficult. How do you create a sense of siblinghood,
Right.
togetherness, usness in a blended family?
And one of the questions that it really isn't answered here is how and when that family came together.
Yeah.
Because when we see families that combine um early and kids are young, we often see a lot more of that siblinghood
Mhm.
than I wouldn't expect someone to treat someone like they're the same as their sister if they came into their lives in their late teens, early 20s. And we
Right.
don't know that here. We really
Yes.
don't.
Yeah. And we do definitely see blended families get together across that age spectrum, sometimes from very young. And like you said, I mean, there are just people that you get along with easier and naturally gravitate toward. And when families come together, that's not necessarily true of the children. They
Right.
often don't have much say in it and they may not be very close. So that's unfortunate and that is hard. And I don't know if the likelihood of creating that kind of siblinghood goes up um, if you are younger when you get together or not, or if it's just as
Yeah.
likely. Do you have a sense of that, Dan?
I only anecdotally, I haven't seen any
Mhm.
data that support that. Um,
Okay.
and what happens here is that there's a reality that some families blend, other families mix, and other families just sort of combine
Coexist. Hmm.
and don't necessarily, and really all of that happens. And getting to the point made by OP here, um, again, I still think when these kinds of things happen, people know it.
Yeah.
Everyone in the
Yeah.
family knows when siblings are just siblings versus when step siblings become siblings. And everyone in the family knows that when step siblings are still not fully seen as siblings. And I think that depending like this happens.
Sure. And I would go so far as to say you're not an asshole for not calling your step sibling a sibling and dropping the step
If that
necessarily.
right. And it
I
really
think it
depends.
depends on what you do with that.
Yeah. Where I'm struggling here, and I don't want to jump to the end, but what we don't know is how it was said in the room.
Yeah. And
Because
that's
it
back to my original comment. I'm a little concerned
right.
about that rude word brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly hear him saying, I never really saw the step sibling as the same as in the same way. And she's terrific and wonderful and we get along great, but I just I've never got there. I never
Mhm.
got there. And what a great self-disclosure that would be.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I could also hear him going, well, or her, I don't know the gender of the person here. Um, maybe we do, and I don't remember. But I can see him going, well, they're not my real sister. Why should I care?
Yeah.
So, like, how is it sad? It's
Back
all
to
delivery.
not what you say, how you say it.
Right, right.
How did I feel when you said it?
And I honestly don't think, I mean, I'm going to really jump the gun here. I don't think we can answer this question because we don't know how it was said.
Yeah.
If it was said one way, it's a wonderful self-disclosure and an opportunity to begin having great conversations. Said in the other way, it's kind of a dick move.
I would agree with that. And I think this is maybe why we're not moving down that path toward making the judgments. We often are kind of leaning and hedging and holding back our opinions. But I really think there's not enough information here, which
No.
I'm kind of excited that the host has found us one of these opportunities, because usually we snap to judgment. And in this particular internet thread, there are lots of options for the declaration, right? You're the asshole, you're not the asshole, everyone sucks here. But sometimes there's just not enough information. Now, maybe this is a great time to throw the conversation to Michael and say, was there any additional information posted in the comments?
Please.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. I was going to say I had a couple thoughts that were kind of interesting side conversations, so in asking for clarification, other pieces came out. And so one of the kind of side conversations was like what therapy is therapy an opportunity to hurl abuse at each other, which is what in some of the examples that the poster who was male seemed to be suggesting, like this was a time to like get stuff off my chest.
No.
And then like there was
Well,
this,
I mean, get stuff off your chest, sure, but in a kind and constructive way. If it's not constructive, it's not therapy.
Right.
yeah. And then there was also a question about like they kept asking like, explain how the family therapy worked, and so he went into more detail and he said, essentially there was a big group, all five of them, all five of them together. Then they each had kind of one-on-one sessions at different times, and then they were like kind of small group pieces. And so some of the one-on-one conversations between the OP and the therapist, the therapist said like you need to say this to the larger group, but apparently it was more exaggerated when he said it than the therapist had anticipated. So like the therapist was a little taken aback by some of the things he said as well, which were, like, I don't know, kind of broke down like what family was and how he felt connected. And like, I've never really felt connected to you or your daughter. And, like some of those things came out that way. So,
So the adult child, the OP, was also commenting on the closeness to the step parent, not just the step sibling.
yeah.
And again, this could be like, I for whatever reason, we just didn't click and we never connected, and I'm sad about that. Or it could have been like, well, we never connected, you never tried. What's the point here?
Yeah.
Like I just don't think we have enough here. And I've been in so many therapy sessions where people are recounting something and I'm like, like I've often wondered what's the context. Not that I don't believe my clients, because you work with what people bring in, but I've certainly worked with couples who see the exact same situation completely differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if so I'm going to speak for the therapist in this room for a moment, right? Like as a therapist, sometimes, especially when you're working with more than one person at a time, somebody says something that you kind of expect, but not with the intensity that you expect. And you and I, Dana, both said we are not therapists that hold back a lot of that disclosure. I, was sort of trained with that. Like, it's okay to have a feeling in the room too.
Right.
And I probably would have expressed some amount of surprise, and I would have worked with the intensity there to talk about what that was like and where that was kind of coming from, and make that a part of that therapeutic process instead of just I hope that in this experience, it wasn't just it just like flopped and just sat there and everyone, was looking at this big old disclosure in the middle of the room going, well, shit, now what do we do?
Yeah. And a good therapist is going to prevent disclosure, or not, you can't necessarily prevent disclosures, but you're going to step in and work to not as much as you can decrease cruelty. If the person's
Yes.
really being mean, if they're being brutally honest, I interrupt that.
Yes.
Like, wait a second, this, like, if you're being productively honest, but it hurts the person some, and it's in service of positivity, maybe. But if you're just
Mhm.
being mean, being brutally honest, quote unquote, to make you, like, finding an excuse to be quote unquote honest, I'm gonna probably interrupt that.
Yeah.
And like, that's not productive. That's not why we're here today. We're not here to
Mhm.
hurt each other.
And
Um,
unfortunately, you hear too often, or at least I have from clients coming into my office. Yeah, we've tried the family therapy, but really, I just felt ganged up on, which
yeah,
is never the goal of a therapist, but I think can be an outcome, unfortunately, if you
right.
don't have enough kind of, I don't want to say control of the room, but you definitely need to be able to intervene firmly and
Mhm.
redirect someone when they're becoming unproductive in their communication.
Right, right. And I think there's so much that got left out here. How that I would like to have, like, I don't think we can render a asshole not an asshole, because we just don't know whether OP brought this forward in a really kind and self-disclosing way, or in a totally cruel, brutal, dickish way. Um,
Well, let me ask you this, because this was one of the conversations in the threads, and nobody. A lot of times you'll get interesting professionals in the comments.
yeah.
They'll say like, "Oh, I'm a psychologist, and this is blah blah blah." But one of the things that kept going back and forth is like what family therapy looks like, and
Mhm.
well, you shouldn't be having. There was like this whole like you shouldn't be having one-on-ones with your psychologist. You should stick in the group, and like those are unproductive and whatever. And then other people saying like, no, like family therapy is kind of what it needs to be and takes on different forms and it kind of depends on the situation. And so I don't know. I'm kind of curious, both of you, what does family therapy look like? Like, what is that?
I loved what you just said, which is family therapy is what it needs to be. There is, I do what I do until I do it differently sometimes. And in this case, where you have 5 adult players that need to maybe have different kinds of conversations, maybe you reorganize. But I think there's an underlying principle that we are working together as a group, as a six sum in this case. You've got 5 adults and a therapist, and you are not going to keep secrets, but sometimes there's some work that needs to be done one direction or another. And then that needs to be brought back to a larger group. And so I don't necessarily have a problem that they met a 3 and excluded 2, as long as the intention was to bring the work of the 3 back to the 5. Is that making
Yeah,
sense?
I tend to agree. I don't do a lot of work with families. I do a lot of work with couples, and I often say, like, if I'm seeing couples, I don't see them individually, except when I do. And I
Right.
usually don't, but sometimes it's necessary to have a couple of visits individually before bringing a couple back together. So in those
Mhm.
cases, I do.
Mhm.
And I think
Exactly.
it's absolutely the same with family. Yes, by and large, you want to see the family as a unit, but there
Mhm.
are times when you're not going to, and that has to be clinically driven, though. And
Exactly.
and what's the
Based
best
on the
clinical
needs of
choice?
what's being
So
presented right now.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
I would disclose that plan and, we would talk about it and prepare for it. It wouldn't be a surprise to anyone and they would understand the rationale. And, we would do as much as we can. I don't want to say to make it fair, but certainly equitable to the issue at hand that we're being asked to help them work on.
yeah. As described, I have no problem with it. To be
Yeah.
honest, the
Yeah,
way
no.
the way
And
OP
I do
described
get
it,
a little prickly when I hear some arrangements when clients bring them in, they say, "Oh, my therapist," da, da, da," and I can get really prickly about it. This
yeah,
didn't raise any hairs for me.
no, I'm good with the way they did this.
Mhm.
What
As
else did the internet?
described.
Yeah, I was
Yes,
gonna say,
as described. Yes, as described. Thank you.
so the internet, unlike you, was very eager to pass a verdict. So you really had you really had two sides here, which were the people who really supported the original poster, saying, no, therapy is a place for brutal honesty. Like it's a place where everybody needs to be, as that needs to lay it all out there. It's an opportunity to have these discussions that you can't have when it's not mediated. It was a word that kept being used. And I was like, I don't know, mediation is really the right word, but so that was one kind of take. And then the other one didn't say that the original poster wasn't the asshole, but really pointed the fingers at the father and step parent, the stepmother, and said that they were the asshole for trying to control the scenario, that it felt like, and this was where the internet like created its own little scenario.
Yeah, I would
and
say
massaged
I don't
it.
remember where they controlled. Where did they control the scenario? I don't.
They made up this version, which is where the in the internet's mind, the step-parent, the stepmother and the parent thought like, we'll have therapy to fix this, and then it didn't go the way they wanted, and so then they're angry,
No,
and so they are the
no,
assholes, is what was
no.
declared. So
That's such a
It's not fair.
there's a real stretch here. I've certainly seen families like this that are combined families where there's struggles, and again, I'm going to assume positive intent, because we always want to assume positive intent, and say, gosh, I really wish we could all get along better. Can we go to family therapy? And everyone going, yeah, let's go to family therapy. But I want to jump back. You talked about honesty, and I think that we really have to be careful about whether, like, I'm not saying we should be intentionally dishonest, but I think sometimes people use honesty as an excuse to say mean things. And really evaluating, is this honesty helping or hurting a relationship? And is it, I mean, we don't necessarily share all of our thoughts and feelings when they're negative and unproductive, whether in therapy or out of therapy.
My hope would be that if you're going to share your honest thoughts, that there would be a path toward working on that. Gee,
Yeah.
I would have really hoped when you and Dad got married that we could really have developed something that looked like a closer relationship. One of the things that's in the way of that might be this. Is that something we could work on and build toward that relationship and that openness, not just a drop the bomb and go, but here's maybe a plan to maybe reconcile. Is that's hopefully why you're there, is to improve things and not just use it as an excuse to tell this truth and then walk away. Like that just feels kind of icky.
Yeah, and I want to. There's also there's an underlying assumption here, or at least I'm reading into this. So Gayle, Michael, tell me if I'm that the OP should feel the same about his about the step sibling, and even if we were to take the word step out, we don't necessarily feel the same towards our siblings. We are often closer to one sibling than another, either because of age or personality style
or
and
interests.
So forget the step part of it. I have a number of siblings. I am closer to some of those siblings than others. I get along better, have warmer feelings towards, have greater degree of positivity, have more in kind alike with, talk on the phone more often as go to getting older adults, and that's fine. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a terrible thing if he doesn't feel the same thing. If we take off the step label, we would be like, oh yeah, of course.
And children have that toward parents, right? I'm closer to my mom or my dad than the other. Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. Just get along better with them. Like there doesn't have to be a quote unquote good reason. It's just the affinity is there, and that relationship is an important part of it. And sometimes we can't exactly define it, and I don't think it's right or wrong. That's just relationships between humans.
Yeah, and I think we're again we're getting to is like, if we can accept that these differences occur and that it's not necessarily bad. That we get along better with this parent than that parent, or this sibling than that sibling, and step or non-step, like, that's fine. As long as we're not being mean or cruel about it or unkind. I'm kind of distressed by this whole, like, why is it a big deal, unless again the guy was being a dick about it.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you both for another riveting debate and a glimpse into the collective conscience of the internet forums. Remember, morality is often shades of gray and not just black or white.
And, again, I often say truth is stranger than fiction. I don't think this is strange or fiction in this case. This is just humanity and families. This is pretty normal stuff today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Please follow and share Veritas Views on any of the podcast platforms, with their neighbors and friends, and always stick around through the end. The credits for the bonus conversation, this one from our mailbag, and we'll see what they have to say about it.
You can follow Dr. Dan Kessler at Dr. Dan Kessler and Dr. Gayle MacBride at Dr. G. MacBride. Oh, and you can find them both at veritaspp.com. Credits. Tickling the Ivories, Matthew Reddington. Art, production, and design, bringing this show together with flair and finesse, Michelle Love. Recording and editing, turning chaos into something worth sharing, Michael MacBride. Intro, outro, I'm Kelly Buttrick, a VO talent who just happens to be Dr. MacBride's cousin. Cats, CJ, Linus, Sadie, and Griffin. Hosting by whomever lost the coin flip. Interruptions by all their children. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapist-client relationship. If you believe you may be experiencing a mental health issue, please seek the assistance of a qualified mental health professional. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 from anywhere in the U.S. to be connected to Crisis Mental Health Services.
Thanks for listening. As promised, here's the bonus conversation. So we launched the mailbag, and that's been kind of a fun thing to have. And we've gotten a couple things in there. The one this week that I thought I would tee up for you guys to see what you had to say about it was, love the show, always funny and insightful. I'm wondering if you would talk a bit about how you avoid laughing in sessions, because I'm sure people have to tell you some fucked up stories or ask ridiculous questions. What do you do?
I saw this and I thought, people tell stories about their lives and we have feelings. And for me, it's not so much that I struggle with laughing. It's more like that I'm a struggle with emotion. I may, sometimes therapists, we struggle with our own tears, our sadness, and it's okay. We're taught like it's okay to have feelings, but it still has to be about the client, not about us. So I'm much more likely to struggle with my own hurt or my own tears than I am to struggle with laughing. Certainly not laughing at someone.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I don't struggle with laughing at someone. Really, I think as therapists,
Or their situation.
Right, we hold this space that there are no dumb questions, right? So, bring them on. We understand that people are in a really vulnerable space, and if someone brings something that is surprising, that sometimes, you might react with laughter, but not at them, more
Right.
maybe at a surprising situation, or sometimes, maybe this is not a secret, but I have a sort of an internal world and my brain is going and it might make a connection that is really funny to me. And if for some reason that breaks through, I'm really careful to talk with someone about like where my brain made a connection. And right. But again, it's not usually in that hard, vulnerable moment. It really is, it's in a moment when it feels appropriate and you're laughing and you're laughing together and with and never at.
No, and sometimes people do come in with things and they're like, I think it happens much more frequently that people are worried they're going to shock us, or worried that we're going to find their problems humorous in some ways. And in almost every situation, like, we've been doing this for a while. It's like a combined close to 60 years, I think.
Yeah.
And it's rare that people spring a new one on us, as it were. And so we probably heard it before.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about talking about it in therapy, and you bring it up, it's probably going to be with almost any good therapist, it's going to be responded to with seriousness and Now, some people bring in stuff, go, oh my God, I can't believe this thing that I did. And they're laughing about it. And yeah,
Fine.
I'd be like, oh
Yep,
yeah,
that's game.
yeah.
Yep,
Oh
absolutely.
that was pretty funny. That was
And
funny.
I will share a laugh with someone around that. But
Absolutely.
this posters or this mailbag question really, I think maybe gets at the root of why some people are a bit avoidant of therapy, which is I'm afraid of bringing stuff because I think you're going to laugh at me. I'm
Right.
afraid of being ridiculed. And that really just doesn't feel like a challenge as a therapist.
I
It's a
can't,
challenge as a human either. Like I don't tend to laugh at someone or their difficulty.
I can't think of a time in therapy where I like, to answer the the mailbag question. I can't think of a time where I had to like restrain laughter, but I have thought of a time when I've had to restrain the intensity of my own emotions because it touched something for me, either personal or just as a really hard thing to hear. And in those cases, you sit with them and I think are honest about your feelings without allowing them to usurp the client's feelings, because it really is about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that being said, there are certain clients that I have that when we work, we say funny things off the wall, just right. And in the whole session, we're doing hard work and it's at a pace. And I sometimes wonder if my laughter can be heard, just ringing out and the client is laughing with, right? And we are having a great time. And that's always really striking to me as a therapist is we're laughing our asses off through a session and doing hard work. And at the end of it, like we've been really productive and we've had some fun in that deep conversation together.
But I will answer your question for you, since for about 10 years, our offices shared a wall. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I've heard you laughing in your
laughing.
With
hopefully
with
someone,
I hear both,
shared
but
laughter.
with them, because sometimes that cuts through some of the pain to be able to look at life and go and find the humor in things. And humor can be a really potent defense if used judiciously and appropriately.
Absolutely. So,
yeah.
Wow, what a
thanks,
great
Michael.
question. Thank
Yeah,
you.
what a great question. Keep those mailbag questions pouring in. I love that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for tuning in, and check us out next week for a whole nother Am I the Asshole debate. And who knows, another mailbag question, perhaps.
Yep.
We love hearing from you, so please review us on Apple, Spotify, or, well, wherever you're listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please review, like, and follow. Also, give it a share. This helps us reach more listeners.